Golden Staircase by Robert Scott Lewis. Will you shut that dog up already? Dad yelled from the front seat, sitting behind his big round toy that made the car move when he turned it. No fair that he got a toy when all I got was this silly rope to play with. I chew and it just lays there all stupid. Dumb thing can't even bark or growl like the other toys do. Sorry, Dad, Annie said as she clicked the box next to her seat and took her rope off. She doesn't even chew on that rope. It just lays across her body when she sits there, but she took it off so she could get close enough to grab me. She was nearly crawling on the floor of the car to get me, and her voice was the richest thing I've ever heard, no kidding. He is just so excited to be home. Well, I wish we never brought the miserable mutt, Dad said with a scowl, looking back in the rearview mirror at me. That's the look that tells me I've been a bad dog. At least he was concerned with my well-being though. He acted tough and smacked me around, but he knew I wanted to be out running and chasing. Barking and jumping. You can't chase anything in this car. By the time I get done barking, the other pup is halfway down the road. I hang my head out the window but then my eyes hurt. Oh, don't be like that, Paul. Mama said, an angel that lady was. She was so pretty too. So pretty, in fact, that Dad couldn't take his eyes off her until one of them big monster trucks barked with their loud bark. Mama couldn't even finish her words before we all started barking. We had a good tea. I hid beneath the seat and Annie was holding on to me tight. When the car stopped, Annie and I kept going and her back went right through the glass at the front of the car. I left her arms and landed in a bush down the street. When I woke up it was raining. I limped over to Annie. She wasn't moving. I looked back to the car and saw that it was fighting with a tree. The wheels were still spinning but the tree didn't move. Silly Dad. I barked at Dad and he moved his head but then went back to sleep. Mama wasn't moving at all. Mama always fell asleep fast. I went over to Annie and barked at her but she wouldn't get up. I nuzzled her and laid next to her until Mom and Dad woke up. At least I would have if the trucks with the loud noises and bright lights didn't show up. I kept barking at them to tell them to be quiet. Couldn't they see that the family was sleeping? But they took me away from the family. Away from Annie. Away from Mama and Dad. I was in a place with other dogs, but they all seemed angry or sad. Some looked sick and some would go into the pink room and never come back out. They always got a big treat in the wet food, but when they went in there, we heard them cry out and we never saw them leave. When Dad walked in, I lit up. I was wagging my tail and sitting as straight as I could. He looked down at me with tears streaming down his face. He smelled like he was the saddest a man could be, and I wanted to comfort him. I pawed the door and whimpered for him to put the leash on me. We could go home and Annie will tell Dad that the dog didn't mean to be trouble. Mama will tell Dad that the dog was just so happy to be home. But Mama wasn't there. You're a bad dog, Dizzy, said Dad, almost barking the words. He was crying, and had that look that already said the words before his mouth did. He's sobbing uncontrollably by the time he was through. You've got to stay here, Diz. Annie. She's not going to be here anymore, and I can't take care of you. Not the way you deserve. Jenny, well, you don't need to hear this. Talking to a dog. Bye, buddy. Dad patted my head and then he walked out. I waited around for days and days. I saw so many four-leggers go into that pink room and never come out. I knew my time was coming and without Annie around, I really didn't care much anymore. That wet food was looking better every day. Daddy, look at this one, a girl said one day. She woke me up and when I wake up, will I get to barkin'? I don't know any better way to start the morning, do you? But when I barked at the girl, well, she looked scared of me and so I stopped. I don't think that one is friendly, Dolly. Daddy said, what silly names they had. Daddy and Dolly. Their names were almost as silly as mine. What's his name? Dolly asked the man with the bad spray. The stuff they spray in your eyes so you bang your head on the floor and can't see right for half the day. He was a bad man. That's Dizzy, honey, he said, and he sounded nice. What kind of power does this Dolly have to make the mean man sound so nice? We found a few days ago and I think he misses his family. They had a rough week and has just got a little worse. What happened to them? Dolly asked. Dolly, Daddy said, and he knelt down to her eye level. He was so much nicer than Dad ever was. Even when Dad used to play fetch with me, he never sounded so calm. I liked Daddy from the start. This dog was in a car crash. He's hurt, and it's not likely that he'll be okay with a new family after what he went through. The little girl that took care of him. You know, honey. Her mother was hurt pretty bad too, but she'll probably survive. Then he patted Dolly on the hand, and she started to cry a little. I was so shocked at what Daddy said that I couldn't help myself. I barked at Daddy to tell him that he was lying. I could still smell Annie. You see, he said to her, and so I stopped. Maybe Daddy was right. Maybe I should be alone. Maybe I should get the big treat and go into the room that nobody on 4 legs comes out of. His owner came in the other day and relinquished his rights to the pup. The man with the bad spray said, sounding more like his usual self. One way or the other he won't be here long. He's sad, Daddy. He's lonely. She then leaned in closer to me and said, Dizzy, are you lonely and sad? Because I am. I want to take you home so neither one of us has to feel that way anymore. You in? I never licked a cage faster in my life. That sour metal tasted like a darn good idea. You sure about this, doll? Asked Daddy. I think Dizzy needs me more than I need him, said Annie, looking up at her dad from her chair. Her eyes were like marbles with flowers in bloom. She could get so many treats with those eyes. Everybody seemed to bend over backwards for Dolly. She always got free food, and people held the doors open for her. She didn't even have to walk on her legs. They pushed her along in a chair with wheels. Dolly didn't need to do her hair either, not the way Annie always did. Annie would spend hours fixing her hair in the mirror, but Dolly had hair that she could take off and put back on. Sometimes she walked around with no hair at all, but she was still pretty. Well, one day I caught a whiff of something. I pawed the door for an hour until someone let me out. You need to go out, Diz? Dolly asked me. You're not going to run away on me, are you? I scratched the door some more. I trust you, Dolly nearly sang. Then she opened the door to the backyard. The smell was so much stronger. I looked at the fence, a fence I could easily clear, and decided I needed to check out what I was whiffing. I looked back at Dolly, who was looking at me through the window. I barked once, then twice, and leapt over the fence. Dizzy, she called from the backyard, but I was running towards the smell. When I got to the source, I saw that it was the tree that the car was fighting with that I was smelling. Is this why Dad couldn't take me home? Was he ashamed that he lost the fight with the tree? So, I got to sniffing around the tree to pinpoint some of the other smells I was smelling. That's when I found Annie's sock puppet princess. She always told me not to chew it, and so I never did. I picked it up and took it home with me. I had to show Dolly. She had to know that Annie could still be out there somewhere. I could smell her out there everywhere. What you got there, Dizzy? Asked Dolly as she sat on the porch. I've been waiting for you. Thought you ran away. I dropped Annie's princess and barked at Dolly. Then my tail started running away from me, so I just had to catch it. Don't want that thing getting too far away. What is that? She asked. A princess? She didn't seem to understand. I put my nose next to it and started sniffing and sniffing and sniffing. What are you looking for, boy? She asked as she pet me. Her hands were soft and felt like the safest place in the world. She picked up the sock puppet princess and examined it closer. She found what I was sniffing at. She plucked the golden strand of hair and looked at it in the sunlight. I barked with excitement, and then my tail started running away again, so I had to catch it. Is this? She asked, and then Daddy popped his head out of the door. Told you he'd pop back up, said Daddy chipperly. He knows where the food is. He brought me this, said Dolly, holding up the golden strand of hair. He brought you a lock of hair? Rapunzel, my love, how fair art thou, said Daddy, and that made Dolly chuckle. She beamed at her father. A love that was given as good as it was gotten. No, Daddy. She gave him a shove and I finally caught my tail. Darn thing almost took off for good. He brought me this. She held up the sock puppet princess and Daddy gave the same scowl that Dad did when he first saw the thing. "You," said Daddy, trying to hold back his laughter. "What an ugly, I like it," said Dolly, holding it close. "I think he knows where this came from. Well, he got it from somewhere. You know what I mean." She shoved her father playfully, and he brought her in for a hug. "I think he's trying to tell me something." "Like what?" asked Daddy, and then he lifted her hair and kissed her bald head. Dolly started to cry a little and so did Daddy. "This," said Dolly through the tears, and then held up the golden strand of hair again. "Let's go inside, doll. Dinner's ready," and those were the magic words. I darted into the door and would you look at that, Daddy even served me a plate. It was spaghetti, and if you didn't know it, spaghetti is fun. It gets everywhere and the balls of pure meat are caked in the red paste and spices. I painted the floor with my nose and licked it all up. "Maybe I shouldn't have given him so much, huh, doll?" Dad asked a distracted Dolly. She was staring at the sock puppet princess from front to back, as if she were looking for something in the pattern. Then she looked up at Daddy with a great big smile. "I think he deserves it today. I've got to do something about that fence," said Daddy. "He just jumped over it?" "He jumped right over." I barked to confirm and they both started laughing. But Daddy must have just been pretending to laugh, because when we were both out back, he pointed at the fence and said, "Bad dog." I tucked my tail in confusion. What did I do? Dolly was happy and Annie was out there somewhere. Daddy raised his hand to me and I jumped back. Was he really going to hit me? No, he put his hand on my head and he was sobbing. I did my job and got close to him. We shared the same body then, my warmth was his warmth, and I could tell that he needed me just as much as Dolly did. I licked his rough face, salty face, and the ocean water leaked from his eyes a little more. "Thank you, Dizzy," he told me as he held me close with his body shaking heavily with each sob and gasp for air. "You're a good dog. You're a good, good dog." The next few weeks were great. We went to the beach twice. They even let me off of the leash so I could play with the other dogs. There was grass from the ocean that tasted like fish, there were little crabs walking in shells and so many birds. I must have scared every bird on the beach, but they kept flying in from the sea, and always landed close to the food. If anyone was getting Dolly's sandwich, it was me or Dolly. That was the last time we went out though. When Dolly got home, she was feeling sick. She didn't leave her room for days. Daddy blamed himself and said that they shouldn't have gotten so much sun, but Dolly was reassuring him that she felt that way before they went, and just didn't say anything about it until it got worse. She said that she was just having too much fun to mention it. "But you need to mention it, doll," said Daddy. "I need to know when you're not feeling well. When you go, doll. I'll be all alone. I know it's selfish to think about me here. You're my angel, my everything. You're all I have, Dolly. I need to know. So that I can prepare me so I can be ready. I love you so much that it hurts." He pinched her arm. "Ow," she said as she rubbed it, and I barked to show Daddy that I was still here to protect her. "I know, Diz," said Daddy, patting my head. "I love you too, you little mongrel." The pat turned into some tugging at my ears, and ended with a belly rub. So not bad at all. The next day was the worst day of them all. Dolly was too sick to get out of bed. Daddy was sitting next to her and petting her head softly. She was a good girl if there ever was one, this pup can attest to that. "How you feeling, doll?" asked Daddy. "I feel cold, Daddy." "Where's Dizzy? Did he run away again?" "He's right here, doll, you see him?" Daddy asked, and I did my part and circled until I found a spot that looked good. She wrapped her arm around me and kissed my head. I just looked back at her with my tongue hanging out and gave her a wet one. "There he is." She laughed, which turned into a bout of coughing. "Well, doll," Daddy said as he stood up. "There's no getting out of this one. We're going to the hospital." "The clean place," said Dolly as she looked up at her father, smiling. "Where grown folks go to deep, damn it, Dolly," said Daddy, showing an emotion he rarely ever smelled like. It was only for a moment, though, because he was kind with his next words. "You've got a morbid sense of humor, Bug." It's almost sick. Of course it is, Dolly said, and when the fit of coughing was over, she finally asked the question that was on my mind. Can Dizzy come with us? Do you think he will behave? Asked Daddy. He's never been bad in public, Dolly reasoned with her father. Except those stupid seagulls that kept going after the pickles in my sandwich. If he starts acting up, then I'll have to bring him back home. Deal, and they shook on it. I wanted in on that action too, so I put my paw on top of theirs. By the time we got to the hospital, Dolly said she was feeling much better, but Daddy thought she should see the doctor, just in case. He always said that, just in case. Daddy, I'm telling you I feel much better. I'm not dizzy anymore. I heard my name, so I started jumping up and down. Daddy was carrying Dolly in his arms, and had the leash around his wrist. I pulled too hard one time and Daddy almost dropped her. After that I stayed close, and we made our way to the front desk. The clerk was looking at me when she said her words. Do you have an emergency tonight? She asked Daddy. It wasn't long until we had our own room, and Dolly was watching TV in the small bed they gave her. Where was I supposed to sit? I couldn't sit on Dolly, not with how she smelled. She smelled like she was in lots of pain. I laid next to her bed and waited. Doctors came all day, and when they went, they wore sad faces and smelled like fear and grief. Some smelled like death too, but they didn't seem evil. They weren't the root of death. They just pointed it out. Sometimes I think that whole building was full of pink rooms. Can we open the window? Dolly asked a nurse that was taking small sticks out of her arm and putting other little sticks in to replace them. It's like water, Dolly whispered to me as I stared at the bag and tube that led to Dolly's arm. I suppose we can if you want it open. It's going to get chilly tonight though, the nurse replied, and then she got up and opened the window. That's when the smell hit me again. It was stronger this time. Did I forget about Annie? No, I didn't forget. I just didn't smell her. But now I do. I got up and poked my head over the windowsill. The ground wasn't too far below. I could jump out and back in again, no problem. I barked at Dolly to let her know I could smell Annie, and Dolly seemed to understand what I wanted. Is he going to be okay in here? Asked the nurse, looking a little nervous. He's fine, said Dolly with her cool smile. Dizzy just smells something. Call if you need us, hon. The nurse said, then left the room. You smell something, don't you, boy? Dolly asked me, and boy did I. I barked to let her know that she was on the right track. Well, she said, pointing to the window. Go get it. I could hear Dolly laughing as she watched me jump out of the window. I barked and howled, and then I ran as fast as I could towards the smell, and would you believe that I ended up right back at that tree? I sniffed and sniffed around that place, but couldn't seem to find anything. Not until I got to the bush that broke my fall. I sniffed around, and then I saw Annie's hairbrush. A gold mine of evidence to show Dolly. I picked up the brush and biting down hard I ran back to the hospital. But when I got there, the window was closed. I pawed at the window but nobody opened it. I could hear Dolly in there asking for me. Where's Dizzy? She cried. Where is he? Open the window, please. Open it. I barked as loud as I could and saw a silhouette in the window. It was Daddy. He opened it and reached down to grab me. He picked me up and placed me on Dolly's lap. It's probably too heavy for her, the doctor said, but Daddy cut him off. He probably is, but he's got something for her. Please, I don't understand it either, but let them have this moment. The doctor and the nurses left the room, but they were still watching from the hall. What is that, Diz? Asked Dolly as she took the brush from my mouth. A hairbrush. She felt the top of her bald scalp and laughed as she looked at the gold hair that was trapped in the bristles. She took some of the hair and held it up to the light. I barked because it was Annie's hair. Annie always had to brush and brush to get the knots out. She hated it, and sometimes she would cry, but after she was done, when she'd look at herself in the mirror, she would look down at me and say, "Worth it, Pooch," and pinch my snout until I growled sometimes. I sure did miss her. John, the doctor said to Daddy, as he took him by the arm to the hallway. We're fine with the dog, we are, it's big, you know? Some of the nurses are getting a bit nervous around him. Has he snapped at anyone? Daddy asked the doctor. No, nothing like that, said the doctor, waving his hand at Daddy. So naturally, I barked at him. The way these people all talked with their hands was just begging for a barkin', wasn't it? Dizzy, said Dolly groggily. You woke me up, you menace. It's that mostly, the doctor said. We have other patients here. We want to make her as comfortable as possible, and of course the dog can stay, but he can't be jumping in and out of the window and roaming free, if you catch my drift. I see what you're throwing at me, Doc, Daddy said, the same way he always played it cool with Dolly when she'd ask him a hard question. I'll do my best to keep him quiet. He can come home with me for a night or two. You might not want to leave, John, Doc told Daddy. I had an itch then and a hankering to scratch it, and so I scratched. Make arrangements for the dog if you have to, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just keep him settled. No more field trips, but I think I'll take him for a walk in a bit, said Daddy, and that got my tail wagging so much that I forgot I had an itch. Taking him through the lobby won't be a problem, will it? John, the doctor said as he put a hand on Daddy's shoulder, earning him another bark. The doctor winced at the sound. Just try to keep him down, please. I will. He'll settle down when the nurses are finished. Dolly is in and out of sleep as it is. We're done, a nurse said and pet me on my ears. Don't you love it when they go for the ears? Then she said, Be a good boy now. That's my cue, the doctor told Daddy. Good night, John. Good night, Jean, Daddy told the doctor. Good night, Jenny. Good night, Paul. Good night, Mr. Pengridge. The man that Daddy called Paul said, but Paul didn't look like Dad. I barked at him and bared my teeth. You're not my dad. He left me and told me I was a bad dog. Nurse Paul looked down at me in confusion. You've never acted like that with me. What's wrong? He thinks you're someone else, said Dolly, not even opening her eyes. Well, I'll be the guy that's leaving. You done, Jen? All done. Night, kiddo. She tapped Dolly's forehead lightly and Dolly smiled. I barked at her then. Whoever this Jenny or Jen was, she certainly wasn't Mama. Mama could light up the room with a smile. This lady was pretty, but she was certainly no Mama. These human names are so confusing. When they were all gone, Daddy told me to lay down on the floor, and so I did. He sat on the ground next to me while Dolly slept and whispered to me while he held on to Annie's hairbrush. What are you doing here? He asked me. I licked his face a couple of times in answer. What are you trying to say here? Wasn't it obvious? Annie was out there. I could smell her. I followed the smell, and there is her brush. There is her sock puppet princess. Do I need to bring more? There's so much more I could bring. You need to walk, buddy. And my tail was a wagon. He even called me Buddy. I like that name better than Dizzy, if you want my honest opinion. Clearly Daddy wanted me to show him the tree and all the other stuff that Annie left behind. I spun in a circle and pawed the closed door a couple of times. All right, said Daddy as he put the leash on my collar. Then he leaned down and said, a quick walk. We don't want to keep Dolly waiting for us. He got a lick for that. Daddy took me for a walk, but it wasn't long until I was leading him. We can't go too far, Diz, said Daddy, but I just yipped and kept tugging and trudging through the cold snow on the ground. Smells were always harder to follow when it snowed, and this was falling fast. All right, already. We can't go too far, though. Don't forget about Dolly. I barked at him and yanked the leash out of his hand. This is for Dolly. Didn't he get that? He ran after me, hollering my name all the way, and when we got to the tree he stopped and fell to his knees. I sniffed around and around, looking for the other things I'd smelled before, but it was hard to follow the scents with the snow falling on it. I found Annie's beret and brought it to Daddy. He clutched it in his hand as he held my collar in the other. This is where it happened? Asked Daddy, letting go of my collar. I slowly walked over to the bush that saved my life, and nuzzled it with my nose and pawed it. Daddy looked at me in confusion, but then I caught a whiff of something. I sniffed around the ground back and forth, and lo, there it was. I started digging. I cut into that dirt like Daddy cuts the crust off of Dolly's sandwiches. You should have seen the look on Daddy's face when he saw what I brought him. Is this? Asked Daddy. Her shoe. That earned him another lick. That's when Daddy's toy started barking, and he put it to his ear. Then his heart started pounding, and I could smell his sweat coming out all over the place. That's the smell of fear. Daddy put the beret in his pocket but dropped the shoe. I didn't have time to bury it again, so I grabbed it before Daddy was yanking me along. Come on, buddy, we gotta go, he said frantically, and he didn't have to wait on me. By the end of it all I was pulling him along. When we got to Dolly's room, the doctors were all around her. They were saying words that sounded like made-up language and passing needles and tools to each other. I barked to let them know to keep that needle away from Dolly. She was always scared of the big ones. John, the doctor said as he turned around to face us. You're going to want to say goodbye. It could happen any moment. She's barely hanging on. Honestly, I don't know how she's doing it. Dizzy? Dolly asked. She must have heard my bark or my whining. She sounded tired, like she needed to sleep. Maybe she needed to sleep for a long time. Daddy? Where were you? Look what is found for you, doll? Daddy said, holding up the beret, but Dolly was staring at me and looked confused. A shoe? She asked, puzzled. That's when Daddy looked down at me and saw that I had the shoe in my mouth. He laughed and patted me on the head as he took the shoe. I didn't even see that he grabbed that. Daddy said and sat down next to Dolly. Dizzy took me for a walk. He showed me where he was getting all this stuff. He just dug that shoe up. Daddy put the beret into Dolly's hand, and she looked at it with wonder. Daddy kissed Dolly on her bare head again and held her close. That's when I nuzzled Dolly's hand, and she tugged on my ears a little. I don't think I've ever been happier than I was on that day. Daddy got up and opened the window. He looked at me before he spoke. I'm putting this out here just for now. Daddy told me, then he tossed the shoe out of the window. I promise you, dog, we will get it before we go. I didn't know what to do. Daddy closed the window before I could even think about jumping after it. I whined and nuzzled at Dolly, but she was sleeping, and so I stopped. She looked sick, and I knew she would be sleeping for a long time. She might wake up, but not for long. I licked her hand a couple of times and pressed my snout into her fingers. It was nice to pretend she was petting me, and sometimes it felt like for just a moment she had scratched on her own. Dolly was a good girl. Dolly only woke up once, and it was very confusing for Daddy. He didn't seem to understand, even though he had seemed like he understood all along. I could hear Dolly's heart beating the slowest rhythm, and I knew it was going to stop soon, but Daddy's heart was pounding like that rock and roll music Annie would listen to. Dolly? Can you hear me, Bug? Daddy asked as he rubbed her arms and her face. Daddy? She was almost whispering the words. What did it all mean? That's when Daddy saw that she was holding the sock puppet princess. Daddy couldn't answer. He was crying and sobbing uncontrollably and holding her tighter. I don't know, doll, said Daddy, failing to fight back his tears. I'm sorry, doll. I'm sorry I couldn't figure it out. I'm sorry I failed. I love you so much, kiddo. All the way to Mars. Only Mars? She asked and coughed hard. The machines around her made harsh noises. Doll, Daddy said as Dolly stared at him with bloodshot eyes. There's nowhere in the universe where you can hide from my love. That's my daddy. Tell Diz, tell him. She started coughing more, and then her eyes rolled back and she wasn't breathing. Her heart, well, not even the slowest rhythm was beating from it. Daddy called Dolly's name over and over as the machines were making all the harsh noises. I was barking at all the people running towards Dolly. It was happening so fast, but it felt like everyone was moving like a snail or a caterpillar. That's when they brought out the big toy that made the high-pitched sound, and put the 2 metal plates on Dolly's chest. Clear, the man that was holding the plates said, and Dolly's body convulsed, but she didn't stir. I was trying to bark the guy's hands right off. Again. The dog, please. Dizzy, yelled Daddy. Knock it off. I shut my snout, but I got closer to Dolly. Her hand was hanging off the bed now, And so I nuzzled my snout into her fingers again, and you could whip me and call me a bad dog if I'm lying when I say that she squeezed my snout. I think she said goodbye then, don't you? After all the yelling and shouting and a good deal of crying from most in the room, they declared what they kept calling a Todd. Time of death, 11:01 a.m., the doctor said, and put his hand on Daddy's shoulder. Daddy was crying more than I've ever seen a grown man cry. I'm so sorry, John. That's not enough to say, but we got 3 more years than we thought. She was a great kid. I mean that. A special one. I know. Daddy barely croaked out his words and had to clear his throat many times. She was. The best little girl a guy could ask for. So smart. She was way funnier than I ever was. He laughed a little and started sobbing again, and that's when I came up to nuzzle at his leg. I didn't get why he was so sad. Dolly wasn't here anymore, but she wasn't gone. I could still smell her the same way I could still smell Annie. I never could get Daddy to understand that when we finally went home. I kept bringing Annie's things from the tree, and he would just put them in a box. He and I spent lots of time together after that. He took me to the park. He took me hunting so I could scare some birds for him. He even took me fishing with him, even though he knew he couldn't catch anything if I couldn't catch anything. Nobody called him Daddy anymore. Everybody called him what that doctor always called him. John. Well, one night I was chasing a rabbit while I was sleeping next to John. When I woke up to find the stupid rabbit disappeared and I was back at home somehow, well, I caught a whiff of something. Was it Annie? No, that's not it. Dolly? Maybe. I got up and sniffed and sniffed. I went out of the doggy door that John had installed for me, and before you could say bad dog, I was hopping over that fence. I could smell Annie in one direction, but that scent was cold. She wasn't there anymore. Dolly's scent was hot, and like a hot dog I ran all the way there. That's when I ended up back at the hospital. I sniffed all around until I found the shoe that John had thrown out of the window. Well, we never did go back and get it, did we? I picked up the shoe and that's when I saw the darndest thing. There was Dolly, sitting in the hospital bed, looking out through the window. She saw me and her face lit up, but that's when I caught a whiff of a different smell. It was Annie and the scent was hot again. Now if a dog has ever had a good idea, then you can spike my collar and put a zapper on it if mine wasn't the best. I dropped the shoe and ran home. One by one I grabbed all the trinkets that I found over the years. I took every one of Annie's things that I brought to John over the years, the ones that he just threw in a box, and I made a trail for Dolly to follow. And there I was waiting at the end of the trail. Dolly woke up and saw the sock puppet princess on the windowsill. She couldn't hear anything going on in the hospital. None of the machines made noises, and she couldn't hear or see anybody nearby. She walked over to the sock puppet princess and thought of Dizzy. Was he trying to tell her something? Did he need help? Did Daddy need help? She looked farther outside the window and saw the shoe that Dizzy had in his mouth a few moments ago. Dolly didn't hesitate. She opened the window all the way and crawled out of it. When she got to the shoe, she looked past it and sure enough she saw the beret that Daddy had put in her hand. She checked the pocket that she put it in and it wasn't there. How could it be? It was in front of her, marking this trail. At the foot of the woods, she saw that golden hair glistening in the moonlight, and knew it was the hairbrush that Dizzy had found. She knew that she had to keep following the trail, and she felt healthier than she ever had in her life. It got harder for her to sift through the woods, but she kept finding trinkets along the way that ensured her that she was still on track. When she picked up the last of the Annie's things that I found for John, Dolly stared up at me. Then she stood tall and looked behind me and her mouth gaped, while her eyes got wide. She was, of course, looking at the rainbow bridge that sat behind me. The world looked like it dropped off of the planet, but the rainbow bridge went on for miles. Does it end? She asked me. Is there another side? I barked her answer, but she didn't seem to understand. I nudged her and begged her to follow me, and soon enough she mustered the courage to do it. Her first step onto the rainbow bridge was timid. She saw me running and jumping on the thing, but she was still too afraid to put her full weight in her step. After she took one, she confidently took the other. It wasn't long until we came upon the answer to her question. Not the question that she'd asked, I'd still have to figure that one out myself. This was the answer to the question she didn't think about. About halfway up the Rainbow Bridge we came upon the golden staircase. And that's where Annie was waiting for us. I ran full speed into that gal, and she hugged me like she was going to squeeze me into juice. I licked her face about 1,000,000 times, and then she told me to settle down. I started barking at Dolly, but she didn't know what I was saying. Dolly was looking down at me with confusion. She was crying. She still didn't seem to understand it. It was Annie who put it into the words that Dolly could hear. "He's telling you that we should climb the staircase," said Annie, her voice like a soft song. "I've been waiting here because I'm scared to go alone. Dizzy always knew when I was scared. He was always there for me. Was he there for you too?" Dolly nodded and bade back her tears to no avail. "He was there for both of us." Dolly let the tears flow freely as she clasped Annie's hand. They both looked back at me after they timidly took their first step together. I barked and yipped, but then my tail started to get away again, so I had to try and pin it down. I heard the girls giggle, and after I caught the nuisance, I saw them climbing the stairs. That's when I caught a whiff of something else. It was coming from the other side of the Rainbow Bridge. It was a smell that I'd spent many nights with alone, and a man that I once called Daddy. I ran like the greyhound on the side of the bus to get there. When I got to the end of the bridge, John was there, and that's when everything changed. It felt like I was looking up at him from the ground. Everything hurt inside me and I couldn't move anymore. John was older, with gray hair and a scruffy beard, and I felt love for him like I'd never felt before. I felt like he was protecting me then. He was kneeling over me, crying. He was thanking me for keeping him from being lonely through the years, and he told me the only thing I felt like I needed to hear. "Thank you for being there for her, buddy. And for me," Daddy said through his tears. "I don't know what we would have done without you. You're a good dog, Dizzy. The best." This concludes The Golden Staircase, A Dog's Perspective, by Robert Scott Lewis. I hope you've enjoyed listening.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Alexa.